Today we're going to discuss algebraic expressions, and those are mathematical phrases that contain numbers, variables, and operations. We are going to identify the different parts of an algebraic expression. So we'll start with the first one, which is a term. It's part of an expression separated by a plus or minus sign. We have a constant. A constant is a number whose value never changes. We have a coefficient. It is a number that is multiplied by a variable. And the last thing we're going to talk about before we do our examples is a variable. And this is a letter used to represent a value in an expression. All right, so we've identified the different parts of an algebraic expression. Now let's do some examples so that we can identify those. So let's look at the first one. So our first example is going to be 3x plus 2y minus 5. All right, so the first thing we want to look at are the terms. How many terms do we have? Now let's go back up and remember that a term is part of an expression that is separated by a plus or minus sign. So I have a plus sign and I have a minus sign. So how many terms do we have? 1, 2, 3. So for terms, we have 3 terms. Okay, so we have term 1, term 2, term 3. These are all terms. Okay, we have 3 terms. The next thing we talked about was a constant. A constant is a value that never changes. That means it stands alone. The number will always be the same. Well, 3 and x, 3x is a variable, y is a variable, negative 5 stands alone. So our constant is going to be negative 5. Don't forget, if you have to use keep, change, you should, and this would become plus a negative 5. Okay, now coefficient. Coefficient are those values, those numbers that are attached to a variable. I'm just going to abbreviate coefficient. So a coefficient is a number that is multiplied by a variable. So we have 3x and we have 2y. When the value and the variable are right next to each other like that, that is considered multiplication. So our coefficients here are going to be 3 and 2. They are both coefficients because they are multiplied by a variable. And our last thing that we're looking for is variable. Well, this should be the simplest one because variables are always going to be represented as letters. So what are our two variables in here? We have x and we have y. So x and y are our two variables. All right, let's try a couple more examples. We have 6 plus 3w. All right, so how many terms do we have? How many terms? We have 1, 2. So we have 2 terms. Okay, because we have one plus sign and it is separated. We have a constant. The constant stands alone. And we have 3w. 3 would be our coefficient because 3 is being multiplied by the variable. And w is our variable. So you will need to identify every part of an expression. Okay, let's try another couple. We have 7a squared plus 5b minus c. Now, I left a little space there because I want you to remember that if a variable does not have a coefficient, such as a 7 here or a 5 here, it's automatically understood to be the number 1. So I would add a 1 in front so I don't forget that that variable does have a coefficient. Okay, so how many terms do we have? How many terms? We have a plus and a minus sign. So we've got 1, 2, 3. So we have 3 terms. 1, 2, 3. Alrighty, do we have any constants? This one has a variable, variable, variable. So we don't have any constants. Now how about coefficient? We have 7, 5, and -1. So our coefficients are 7, 5, and -1. Coefficients are the ones that are attached to the variable. And how many variables do we have? We have 1, 2, 3. So we have A, B, C. So we have 3 variables. Okay, let's do one more example. If we have m over 6 plus 3n minus 26. Okay, now this here, remember what we said above. If the variable doesn't have a number in front of it, we automatically add 1. So my m is standing alone. I'm putting a 1 in front of that. So I need to now break this apart, and this now becomes 1 over 6m plus 3n minus 26. So how many terms do we have? Remember, terms has to be broken apart by a plus or a minus sign. We have 1, 2, 3. So we have 3 terms. Do we have any constants? Do we have a constant? Okay, so we have a constant, and that's the number that stands alone. There's no variables with it at all, and that would be -26. Don't forget to bring the negative sign with it. Then we have our coefficients. Do we have a coefficient? We have 3. It's being multiplied by n. And we have 1/6 that's being multiplied by m. So I have 2 coefficients, 1/6 and m. Now, do I have any variables? I have 2 variables, m and n. So you are going to be identifying the different parts of an expression, and you're going to label them terms, constant, coefficient, and variable.